Some secrets stay buried with the people we love, and we spend our lives wondering what we never asked. When Earl loses his father and returns to the ranch he left decades ago, he's just looking for closure. But the locals whisper warnings about the old barn nobody's opened in 50 years. Inside, he finds more than dust. A wagon loaded with gold coins and journals revealing his father's hidden life, secret loves, and debts owed to strangers. The fortune is staggering, but the real inheritance might be something money can't buy. What was his father protecting all those years? Before we jump back in, I really want to hear from you. Tell us where you're tuning in from right now, and if this story touches your heart or brings back any memories, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you. The dust settled behind Earl McKenna's pickup truck as he pulled up to the ranch gate for the first time in 23 years. The hinges groaned their protest when he climbed out to swing it open, metal on metal, a sound that transported him back to boyhood mornings when this same gate had seemed impossibly heavy to his small hands. Now, at 42, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who'd learned that rushing only brought regret. The ranch spread out before him like a faded photograph, all the colors muted by time and memory. The main house stood 200 yards up the gravel drive, its white paint peeling in long strips that revealed the gray wood beneath. The porch sagged on the left side, where the support beam had finally given way, just as his father had always predicted it would. Beyond the house, the barn loomed dark against the late afternoon sky, its red paint long since surrendered to weather and neglect. Earl had received the call 3 weeks ago. His father had passed quietly in his sleep at 78, the doctor said. No pain, no struggle. Just went to bed one evening and didn't wake up. The news had found Earl in Phoenix, where he'd been working construction and trying not to think about all the years he'd let slip away. He told himself there would be time, there was always supposed to be more time. But time had its own ideas about such things. The funeral had been small. A handful of neighbors, old ranch hands, who'd moved on to other places but came back to pay respects. Earl had stood by the graveside in his only suit, feeling like a stranger at someone else's family gathering. He'd shaken hands with people whose names he should have remembered, accepted condolences with a nod and a tight smile. Nobody mentioned the years of silence between father and son. Country folk had a way of leaving certain things unsaid. His wife Sarah had died 4 years earlier, breast cancer that came back twice before it took her for good. They'd never had children, tried for years, spent money they didn't have on doctors and treatments, but it just never happened. After she passed, Earl had drifted, taking jobs that kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. He sent Christmas cards to his father those first years. Never got anything back except the occasional gruff phone call that lasted all of 3 minutes. Eventually, even those stopped. Now here he was, the prodigal son returned to inherit a rundown ranch worth less than the back taxes owed on it. The lawyer had explained everything in that careful way lawyers have, like they're reading from a script they've memorized. The property, the livestock, what few head of cattle remained, and whatever personal effects were in the house. It all belonged to Earl now, for whatever that was worth. He drove slowly up to the house, gravel crunching under his tires. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and gold, the way it always did this time of year. September in Montana had a quality of light that made even sad things look beautiful. Earl remembered his mother saying that once, years before she'd left when he was 17. She'd been standing on this same porch, looking out at the mountains, and she'd said the light made everything look like a promise. 3 days later she was gone, run off with a feed salesman from Billings. His father never spoke her name again. The house smelled like old coffee and wood smoke when Earl stepped inside. His father had never been much for keeping things clean, and the years showed in layers of dust on every surface. The furniture was the same, the brown sofa with the cigarette burn on the armrest, the oak dining table his grandfather had built by hand, the gun cabinet with its collection of rifles that probably hadn't been fired in a decade. Earl set his duffel bag by the door and walked through the rooms, reacquainting himself with a place that felt both familiar and foreign. His old bedroom was exactly as he'd left it. Bed still made, rodeo trophies from high school on the dresser, posters of country singers on the walls. It was like a museum exhibit of a life that had stopped at 19. In the kitchen, he found his father's coffee cup still sitting by the sink, half full of liquid that had long since grown a film on top. The sight of it hit Earl harder than he'd expected. That cup represented the last normal morning his father had, the last time he'd stood in this kitchen thinking there would be another day after this one. Earl poured the contents down the drain and washed the cup carefully, setting it in the dish rack to dry. As evening settled over the ranch, Earl sat on the porch with a beer he'd found in the refrigerator. The label was faded, probably been there for months, but it was still cold enough. He watched the sun sink behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and red. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed their evening song. The sound carried across the empty fields, mournful and eternal. A truck rattled up the drive just as full dark was settling in. Earl recognized Tom Henderson before the man even got out. Same stooped shoulders, same careful way of moving that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and harder weather. Tom had been his father's closest friend, if his father could be said to have had friends. They'd worked cattle together for 40 years. "Earl," Tom said, climbing the porch steps slowly. "Good to see you back." They shook hands, and Earl gestured to the other chair on the porch. Tom settled into it with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his bones. "Your daddy was a good man," Tom said after a moment. "Stubborn as they come, set in his ways but good at his core." "I want you to know that," Earl nodded, not trusting his voice. There was a lump in his throat that hadn't been there a moment ago. "I know things were complicated between you two," Tom continued, "but he talked about you. Not often, and never directly, but I could tell. A man knows when another man's carrying regret." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. "What are you planning to do with the place?" "Haven't decided yet," Earl admitted. "Lawyer says I need to go through everything, settle the estate. Figured I'd take a few weeks, see what needs doing." Tom was quiet for a long moment, then spoke carefully. "There's one thing you should know. That old barn out back, the big one past the cattle pens, nobody's been in there for close to 50 years. Your daddy kept it locked up tight, wouldn't let anyone near it." Earl looked toward the dark shape of the barn, barely visible against the night sky. "Why?" "Never said, but folks around here learn not to ask. Your daddy had his reasons, I'm sure of that. Just thought you should know before you go poking around." Tom stood to leave, his knees popping in the quiet. "If you need anything, I'm just down the road. Phone number's probably still on the board in the kitchen." After Tom left, Earl sat alone in the darkness, thinking about the barn. 50 years. That would have been around the time he was born. What could his father have locked away for all that time? What secret could matter enough to keep for half a century? The questions followed him inside when he finally went to bed in his old room. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the house settle and creak around him, thinking about all the years that had passed, all the conversations that would never happen now. The barn sat out there in the darkness, holding whatever mysteries it held, waiting. Morning came early to the ranch, the way it always had. Earl woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of his old bedroom, momentarily confused about where he was. Then memory returned. The funeral, the drive, Tom's warning about the barn. He made coffee in his father's kitchen, using the same battered percolator that had been there since his childhood. The ritual felt strange and familiar at once, like wearing someone else's coat and finding it fits better than expected. While the coffee brewed, Earl stood at the window, looking out at the ranch buildings scattered across the property. The barn dominated the view, a massive structure that had probably been impressive 50 years ago. Even now, weathered and worn, it held a kind of presence. The doors were chained shut with a padlock that looked newer than everything around it. His father must have replaced it periodically, Earl realized. Whatever was inside mattered enough to maintain that security. He spent the morning going through the house, opening drawers and closets, trying to get a sense of how his father had lived these last years. The process felt intrusive, like reading someone's diary without permission. In the bedroom closet, he found his father's clothes hanging in neat rows, flannel shirts, worn jeans, a good suit that had probably been purchased for Earl's mother's funeral 40 years ago. The desk in the small office off the living room yielded more. Bills paid on time, careful records of cattle sales and equipment purchases, a ledger documenting every expense and income for the ranch. His father had been meticulous, Earl saw. Every dollar accounted for, every transaction noted in the same careful handwriting that had filled out Earl's grade school permission slips. But there was nothing personal. No letters, no photographs beyond the few faded ones on the mantel, no diary or journal. It was as if his father had deliberately scrubbed away anything that might reveal the man beneath the rancher. By noon, Earl found himself standing in front of the barn again. The padlock gleamed in the sunlight, a modern lock on ancient doors. He could walk away, leave whatever was inside undisturbed, sell the property and head back to Phoenix. That would be the easy thing, but Earl had spent 4 years learning that easy wasn't always right. When Sarah was dying, the easy thing would have been to let her go sooner, to stop the treatments that bought them weeks instead of years. But they'd fought, both of them, because some things mattered more than easy. He went back to the house and searched until he found his father's key ring in the desk drawer. There were a dozen keys on it, most of them labeled in that same precise handwriting: truck, tack room, equipment shed. And one, newer than the others, labeled simply barn. The key turned smoothly in the padlock. The chain rattled as Earl unwound it from the door handles, heavy links that had held for decades. He pulled on the right door, and it moved with a groan of protest, swinging open to reveal darkness within. Sunlight spilled across the threshold, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Earl stood there for a long moment, heart hammering in his chest, feeling like he was about to cross some invisible line. Tom's warning echoed in his mind. Nobody's been in there for close to 50 years. He stepped inside. The barn was cavernous, far larger than it appeared from outside. The roof soared overhead, ancient timbers still solid despite the years. Light filtered through gaps in the walls, creating stripes of gold across the dirt floor. The smell hit him immediately. Old wood, leather, and something else. Something that reminded him of his grandmother's attic. That particular scent of time preserved, and there, in the center of the barn, covered with a heavy canvas tarp, sat something big. Earl approached slowly, his boots stirring up dust that made him cough. The tarp was secured with rope, knotted tight and tucked under. It took him several minutes to work the knots free, his fingers clumsy with anticipation. When he finally pulled the canvas away, it fell in a cloud of dust that made him step back, coughing. When the air cleared, Earl stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. It was a wagon, an old freight wagon, the kind that had hauled goods across the frontier more than a century ago. But that wasn't what made Earl's breath catch in his throat. The wagon was loaded, absolutely filled, with wooden crates and canvas sacks. And from the closest sack, which had split open with age, gold coins spilled onto the wagon bed, gleaming in the filtered sunlight. Earl moved forward, like a man in a dream. He picked up one of the coins, feeling its weight in his palm. It was real, heavy, old. He could see the date, 1884. His hands shaking, he opened one of the wooden crates. More coins, stacked in neat rows. Another crate, jewelry. Gold watches, rings, necklaces. A third, paper money, bills so old the ink had faded to brown. There had to be a fortune here. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Just sitting in his father's barn for 50 years. But what stopped Earl cold, what made his knees go weak, was what he found in the last crate he opened. It was filled with journals and letters, all carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture and time. On top of the stack lay a single envelope, and written on it in his father's unmistakable handwriting were 3 words: "For my son." Earl sank down onto the wagon bed, the envelope clutched in his trembling hands. All around him the gold gleamed in the dusty light. But it was this envelope that mattered, this message from a dead man to the son he'd barely spoken to in 23 years. Whatever secrets the barn held, whatever story this impossible treasure told. It started here. With hands that shook, Earl opened the envelope and began to read. The letter was dated 3 months before his father's death. The handwriting was shakier than Earl remembered, but still recognizable. "Son," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you found this barn, then you're finally learning the truth I should have told you years ago. I was never good with words when we were face to face. Maybe this way's better, maybe not. But you deserve to know." Earl read on, his father's voice coming through in every line. The story it told was impossible, yet the evidence sat all around him. The gold, his father explained, had belonged to a man named William Garrett. In 1885, Garrett had been running guns to the Lakota, trying to help them resist the encroaching settlers. He'd been caught, arrested, and his considerable fortune, earned from years of legitimate mining, had been confiscated by the authorities, except it hadn't been confiscated. Garrett had hidden it first, and on his deathbed in a Montana prison in 1923, he'd told the secret to a young guard named Robert McKenna, Earl's grandfather. Pa found that wagon buried in a ravine where Garrett said it would be. The letter continued. Every ounce accounted for. Garrett made Pa promise to do something with it. Said it was blood money in a way. Earned honest, but meant for a cause that got people killed. Said it should be used to help folks, the kind of folks who needed helping. Pa took that promise serious. Earl looked up from the letter, his mind reeling. His grandfather had found this treasure 90 years ago, and his father had known about it all along, he read on. His grandfather had used some of the money, carefully, secretly, to help people during the Great Depression. Anonymous gifts to families about to lose their farms. Dr. Bills paid for people who couldn't afford them. A scholarship fund that put 3 local kids through college. All of it done quietly, in ways that couldn't be traced back. When his grandfather died in 1952, he'd passed the secret to Earl's father, along with the same charge. Use it to help people, but do it carefully. The moment anyone knew about the fortune, it would be taken away. The government would claim it, or thieves would steal it, or family would fight over it. The only way to honor Garrett's wish was to keep it hidden and use it slowly. I tried to do what Pa did, his father wrote. Over the years, I helped people when I could. Never told them where the money came from. There's a ledger in the house, hidden in the false bottom of my desk drawer. It lists everyone I helped. It's not much compared to what's here, but I did what I could while keeping the secret. The letter went on, and with each line, Earl understood more. His father's strange behavior, the way he'd kept people at arm's length, the locked barn, it all made a terrible kind of sense. He'd been carrying this secret his entire adult life, alone. I know I wasn't a good father to you, Earl. When your mother left, something broke in me. I got hard, pushed you away when I should have held on. By the time I realized it, you were gone. And I didn't know how to fix it without telling you this secret, and I couldn't tell you because I'd promised Pa I wouldn't. Stupid, maybe. But a promise is a promise. Earl's vision blurred. He wiped his eyes roughly with his sleeve. Now it's yours. The gold, the responsibility, all of it. You're a better man than I ever was. Sarah was lucky to have you, and I'm sorry I never told you that when she was alive. You'll know what to do with this. Help people, Earl. That's all Garrett wanted, all Pa wanted, all I want. Help people and don't let it change who you are. The letter ended simply, your father, John McKenna. Earl sat in the wagon for a long time, the letter in his lap, surrounded by a fortune and the weight of 3 generations. Outside, the afternoon was waning. Inside the barn, shadows grew longer. Finally, he stood. There was a lot to figure out, a lot to understand. But first, he needed to find that ledger. He needed to see exactly what his father and grandfather had done with this impossible gift. And then he'd need to decide what kind of man he was going to be. Back in the house, Earl found the false bottom in his father's desk, exactly where the letter said it would be. The ledger inside was bound in cracked leather, filled with his father's precise handwriting. Each entry was dated, with a name, an amount, and a brief note. Henderson family, September 1979, $800. Medical bills for Tom's youngest daughter. Told him an anonymous donor heard about their situation. Martinez Ranch, April 1983, $2,000. Fire insurance didn't cover half what they lost. Said it was from a church fund. Sarah McKenna, December 2011, $15,000. Experimental treatment in Houston. Told Earl I'd taken a second mortgage. Earl's breath caught. Sarah's treatments. The ones he'd thought had bankrupted them both. The ones he'd felt so guilty about. His father had paid for them. Had lied about where the money came from, so Earl wouldn't refuse it. He sat down heavily, the ledger open on the desk. Page after page of kindness rendered in neat columns. Hundreds of entries over 40 years. His father had helped dozens of families, quietly and without recognition. The total came to nearly $200,000. But that was barely a fraction of what sat in that barn. Earl had tried to estimate the value while sitting in the wagon. Even conservative figures put it at several $1,000,000. Maybe more, depending on the collector value of the older coins and jewelry. The weight of it pressed down on him. This wasn't just inheritance, it was responsibility. 3 men before him had carried this secret, had used this wealth to help others while living modestly themselves. His grandfather had died in this house, leaving nothing but the ranch and its burden. His father had done the same, and now it was Earl's turn. He spent the next 2 days studying the ledger, learning the patterns of his father's charity. The man had been strategic about it, spreading help across years, so no pattern emerged. Never too much at once, never in ways that would draw attention. Always anonymous, always careful. On the 3rd day, Tom Henderson stopped by again. He found Earl on the porch, coffee cup in hand, staring out at the barn. "You opened it," Tom said. It wasn't a question. Earl nodded slowly. "How'd you know?" "Chain's gone from the doors. And you've got that look your daddy used to get sometimes. Like you're carrying something heavy." They sat in silence for a while. Finally Earl spoke. "You ever wonder where that money came from? The money for your daughter's medical bills?" Tom's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Your daddy told me it was an anonymous donor." "Did you believe him?" "No," Tom said simply. "But I knew better than to ask questions. Your daddy helped a lot of folks over the years. We all knew it, even if nobody said it out loud. Figured he had his reasons for keeping quiet." Earl pulled the ledger from his jacket pocket and held it out. Tom took it carefully, like it might break. He read the first few pages, then closed it gently. "This is what was in the barn. Part of it. There's more?" Earl just looked at him and Tom's eyes widened. "Lord have mercy," Tom whispered. "How much?" "Enough that I need help figuring out what to do with it." Tom handed the ledger back. "That's not my call to make, Earl. Whatever your daddy left you, that's your burden to carry." "Maybe, but he trusted you. And right now I could use someone I can trust." The old man studied him for a long moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I don't want to do this alone. I'm thinking whatever my father and grandfather did, they did it by themselves, and maybe that's why it took so long. Maybe that's why they couldn't use more of it. Because doing it alone, keeping it secret, it limited what they could do. You want to tell people?" "No," Earl said firmly. "But I want help. A few people I can trust. People who knew my father, who understand why this matters." Tom rocked back in his chair, considering. "That's a dangerous game. More people who know, more chance something goes wrong. I know. But I've been thinking about something Sarah used to say. She'd tell me that trying to do everything yourself isn't strength, it's pride. And pride gets in the way of actually helping people. Your wife was a wise woman." "She was," Earl agreed quietly. "So I'm asking, will you help me? Not just with the money, with figuring out how to do this right." Tom was quiet for a long time. Then he stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the mountains. "Your daddy and I were friends for 40 years, he said finally. "But we weren't close, if that makes sense. We worked together, helped each other out, but we never really talked. Not about things that mattered. I always thought that was just how he was. Now I'm thinking maybe he was lonely. Maybe carrying that secret by himself all those years ate at him more than anyone knew." He turned back to Earl. "I'll help you, on one condition." "What's that?" "We do this careful. We don't rush. And if I think we're about to make a mistake, you listen." Earl stood and extended his hand. They shook on it, and for the first time since finding the barn, Earl felt like he might not be drowning. "There's someone else we should talk to," Tom said. "Maria Garcia." She runs the food bank in town, volunteers at the church, knows every family in this county that's struggling. If we're going to help people, she'll know who needs it most. Can we trust her? With my life, Tom said without hesitation. She's kept more secrets than you and I put together. And she's got a good head on her shoulders. Won't let us do anything foolish. Then let's talk to her. One more thing, Tom added. You need to think about what you want for yourself, Earl. This money, your daddy and granddaddy used it to help others, but they still had to live. Had to keep the ranch running, put food on the table. There's nothing wrong with keeping enough to build a life here, if that's what you want. Earl looked out at the ranch, at the mountains beyond. For the first time in years, he thought about staying somewhere, putting down roots, building something instead of just drifting. I don't know what I want yet, he admitted. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out what's right. That's a good place to start, Tom said. Better than most. That evening, after Tom left, Earl went back to the barn. He stood in the doorway, looking at the wagon full of gold, thinking about 3 generations of men who'd kept this secret. They'd done good with it, he could see that. But they'd also paid a price. His grandfather had died without ever telling his own wife. His father had pushed everyone away, living alone with his burden. They'd helped people, yes, but at what cost to themselves? Earl thought about Sarah, about the conversations they'd had in those last months. She told him that life was too short to carry everything alone, that asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. At the time, she'd been talking about letting her go, accepting that some fights couldn't be won. But maybe the lesson applied here too. He wouldn't do this alone. He'd build something better, a way to honor the past while moving forward, a way to help people without sacrificing himself in the process. The barn had held its secret for 50 years. Now it was time to let some light in. Maria Garcia arrived at the ranch 2 days later, driving a truck that had seen better decades. She was in her 60s, compact and efficient, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She shook Earl's hand with a grip that spoke of years of hard work. Tom tells me you've got something interesting to discuss, she said, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. They sat at the kitchen table. The 3 of them, and Earl told her the story. He watched her face as he spoke, looking for signs of greed or calculation, but found only growing wonder. When he finished, she sat back and let out a long breath. Sweet Mary and Joseph, she murmured. Your father was behind all those anonymous donations. I always wondered. You knew? Suspected. Over the years, whenever a family was in real trouble, money would appear. Always just enough, always anonymous. I run the food bank. I see who's struggling. And I noticed the pattern. Someone was watching, someone was helping. I thought maybe it was the church or some wealthy donor from out of town. Never imagined it was John McKenna, living in this run-down ranch. He lived simply so others could live better, Tom said. And now Earl wants to continue that work, Maria said, looking at him steadily. But differently. I can't do it alone, Earl said. And I can't take 40 years to help a few dozen families. There's too much need and time is... He stopped, thinking of his father dying alone in this house. Time matters. Maria folded her hands on the table. What exactly are you proposing? I don't know yet. That's why I need your help. Both of you. Tom knows the ranching families, the old-timers. You know everyone else. Together, maybe we can figure out how to do this right. There are risks, Maria said carefully. The more money you give away, the more questions people will ask. And if word gets out about what's in that barn... I know, Earl interrupted. But I've been thinking, what if we don't just give money away? What if we create something sustainable? My father and grandfather, they helped people one crisis at a time. That's good, but it's reactive. What if we could be proactive instead? Tom leaned forward. What do you mean? A foundation, maybe. Or a trust. Something that looks legitimate, has a board, handles money properly. We could say it was funded by, I don't know, a wealthy relative who passed away. Someone from back east, never lived here, but wanted to help rural Montana families. Maria's eyes lit up. That could work. People wouldn't question it if it was set up properly. And it would let you help more people, more openly. There's still the problem of the gold itself, Tom pointed out. You can't just walk into a bank with a wagon full of century-old coins. I've been researching that, Earl admitted. There are dealers, auction houses that handle estate sales. If we sell things slowly, spread across different dealers, different cities, it won't draw attention. It'll take time, but that's okay. We're not in a rush. How much are we talking about? Maria asked. In total, Earl had spent hours doing calculations. Conservative estimate, 3 million. Maybe as much as 5, depending on collector value. The number hung in the air. Maria and Tom exchanged glances. That's life-changing money, Maria said softly. For a lot of families. It was supposed to be, Earl said. Garrett, the man who originally owned it, he wanted it used to help people. My grandfather and father tried to honor that. Now it's my turn. But I want to do it better, smarter. I want to build something that lasts beyond me. They talked for hours, throwing out ideas, shooting down problems, building plans. Maria had a legal background. She'd been a paralegal before retiring, and she started sketching out what a foundation would need. Tom talked about the families he knew were struggling, the ones too proud to ask for help, but desperate nonetheless. By the time Maria left, they had the bones of a plan. Earl would quietly begin selling portions of the treasure through legitimate channels. The money would go into a trust, managed by all 3 of them. They'd create a foundation to distribute. It's scholarships, medical assistance, farm relief, whatever was needed most. It's not perfect, Maria said as she prepared to leave, but it's a start. And Earl, what you're doing here, what you're trying to build, your father would be proud. After she left, Earl and Tom stood on the porch in the gathering dusk. You really going to stay? Tom asked. Make a go of this place. Earl looked out at the ranch, at the mountains going purple in the twilight. For years he'd been running. From his past, from his grief, from the idea of putting down roots anywhere. But standing here now, he felt something shift inside him. I think so, he said. There's work to do here, not just with the foundation. The ranch needs attention too. And he paused, trying to find the words. I need to be somewhere that matters. Sarah and I, we never had a home. Not really. Always renting, always temporary. Maybe it's time I built something permanent. Your daddy would like that, Tom said. He always hoped you'd come back, even if he never said it. That night, Earl couldn't sleep. He lay in his old bedroom, listening to the house sounds, thinking about the future. The plan they'd made was good, but it was also risky. One wrong move, one person talking to the wrong person, and everything could come crashing down. But wasn't that true of anything worth doing? Sarah had taught him that, every day with her. After the diagnosis had been a risk, a gamble, that there would be another day, another moment, another chance to say, I love you. They'd lost that gamble in the end, but Earl had never regretted trying. This was the same. A gamble that he could honor his father's legacy, help the people who needed it, and build something good from a secret that had been kept too long. He got up and went to the window. The barn was dark against the night sky, but Earl could picture what was inside. The wagon, the gold, the journals, 3 generations of hope and responsibility waiting for him to decide what came next. His father's letter had said Earl was a better man than he'd ever been. At the time, Earl had thought that was just grief talking, a father's last attempt to make peace. But maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was permission to do things differently, to learn from the past without being bound by it. Earl made a decision then. Standing at the window in the house where he'd grown up, he would stay. He would fix up the ranch, make it a real home. He would build the foundation with Tom and Maria, help the people who needed it. And he would do it all without hiding, without isolating himself the way his father had. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But for the first time since Sarah died, Earl felt like he had a purpose. Not just something to do, but a reason to wake up in the morning. The barn's secret was out, at least to 3 people, and that, Earl thought, was exactly how it should be. Some burdens were too heavy to carry alone. The first test of their plan came 3 weeks later. Earl had carefully packaged a selection of the least distinctive gold coins, 20 double eagles from the 1880s, and driven 6 hours to a coin dealer in Billings. He'd called ahead, said he was settling his grandfather's estate, had some old coins to sell. The dealer, a thin man named Mitchell with jeweler's glasses perched on his nose, examined each coin with meticulous care. Earl forced himself to breathe. Normally, to act like a man who'd simply found some old family heirlooms. "These are in excellent condition," Mitchell said finally. "Your grandfather took good care of them. I can offer you $42,000 for the lot." Earl had researched enough to know it was a fair price. He accepted with a handshake, and just like that, the first piece of the treasure became legitimate money. Money that could be deposited in a bank, used to establish the foundation, put to work helping people. Over the next 2 months, Earl made similar trips to dealers in Great Falls, Missoula, even as far as Spokane. Each time he sold small amounts, never enough to raise questions. The money accumulated in a trust account Maria had helped him establish. By late November, they had nearly $300,000 ready to deploy. Meanwhile, Earl worked on the ranch. Tom helped him repair fences, patch the barn roof, get the cattle operation back to something resembling profitable. The physical labor felt good after years of construction work in Phoenix. His hands remembered the rhythm of ranch life, the early mornings, the honest exhaustion, the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. One evening, as they were finishing up work on the cattle pens, Tom cleared his throat in that way he had when something was on his mind. "Been meaning to ask you something," he said, not quite meeting Earl's eyes. "Go ahead. That entry in your daddy's ledger about my daughter Jenny's medical bills. You saw that was 1979. I did. She died in 1982. Cancer came back and there wasn't anything more the doctors could do." Tom's voice was steady, but his hands gripped the fence rail tight. "Your daddy paid for her funeral too. Told me it was from a church fund, same as before. I let him lie because I needed to believe it. Needed to think there were good people in the world who helped strangers." Earl waited, sensing there was more. "I never thanked him," Tom continued. "Never acknowledged what he'd done because that would have meant admitting I'd known all along. And now he's gone, and I can't—" His voice caught. "He didn't do it for thanks," Earl said quietly. "The ledger entries, they're all like that. No expectation of gratitude or recognition. He just helped people because it was right. I know that. But a man ought to be thanked for his kindness, even if he doesn't want it." Tom finally looked at Earl. "So I'm thanking you now for him. And I'm telling you that what we're building here, this foundation, it matters more than you know. Because there are a lot of families like mine, people who needed help and got it from your daddy. They never knew who to thank. Maybe now they will." The first official grant from the McKenna Family Foundation went to the Rodriguez family in early December. Their son had been accepted to Montana State University but couldn't afford to go. The foundation gave him a 4-year scholarship, full tuition and books. Maria handled the presentation, making it clear that the foundation existed to support rural families pursuing education. The second grant paid medical bills for an elderly rancher who'd had a stroke. The third helped a young couple whose house had burned down. The fourth, fifth, and sixth came in quick succession, a pattern of help that spread across the county like gentle rain after a long drought. People started to notice. The newspaper ran a story about the mysterious new foundation. The reporter tried to track down Earl for an interview, but he declined through Maria, saying the foundation preferred to work quietly. That was true enough, even if the full truth stayed hidden. But not everyone was happy about the foundation's appearance. One cold December morning, Earl found Derek Paulson waiting on his porch. Derek was a developer from California who'd been buying up ranches in the valley, consolidating them for a luxury resort development he'd been planning for years. "Mr. McKenna," Derek said, standing as Earl approached. He was dressed like a cowboy from a catalog, new boots, pristine hat, designer jeans that had never seen a day's work. "I've been hoping to speak with you." "About what?" "About your property." I represent Mountain Vista Development, and we're very interested in acquiring this ranch. We're prepared to make you a generous offer." He named a figure that would have solved all of Earl's problems a year ago. "Not interested," Earl said flatly. Derek's smile didn't waver. "I understand. This is your family's land, lots of history here. But consider, the property taxes alone must be crippling, and the ranch isn't profitable, hasn't been for years. We're offering you a chance to walk, away with enough money to live comfortably anywhere you choose." Said, "I'm not interested. There's also the matter of this foundation you've started." Derek's tone shifted slightly, taking on an edge. "People are curious where the money came from. A ranch that's barely solvent suddenly funding scholarships and medical bills? It raises questions." Earl felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, just pointing out that transparency matters. The IRS pays attention to charitable foundations, makes sure everything is legitimate. Wouldn't want any complications to arise." It was a threat, thinly veiled. Sell, or Derek would start digging into the foundation's finances. "I appreciate you stopping by," Earl said, his voice carefully neutral. "But I'm not selling. Not now, not ever. This land stays in my family." Derek's pleasant expression finally cracked. "You're making a mistake. Progress is coming to this valley whether you like it or not. The other ranchers have been smart enough to sell. You're just holding out for more money." "I'm holding out because this is my home. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." After Derek left, Earl called Tom and Maria. They met at the house an hour later, and Earl explained the encounter. "He's dangerous," Maria said immediately. "I've dealt with his type before. They smile while they're planning how to destroy you. Can he actually cause problems for the foundation?" Earl asked. "Depends on how deep he digs," Maria admitted. "The foundation is legitimate. We filed all the right paperwork, followed all the rules. But if he starts asking questions about the source of the initial funding, starts demanding documentation we don't have, then we have a problem," Tom finished. They sat in silence, the weight of the situation settling over them. Earl had been so focused on helping people, on honoring his father's legacy, that he hadn't considered someone might actively work against them. "There's something else," Tom said slowly. "Derek Paulson has been buying up ranches for 2 years now. He's got maybe 70% of the valley already. But his development project needs water rights, and those come with the land. Your ranch controls some of the best water in the county, so he doesn't just want my land," Earl said. "He needs it." "Exactly. And men like that don't take no for an answer. They just find another way to get what they want." Earl stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch his grandfather had built, his father had maintained, and he was now trying to preserve. Everything they'd worked for, the foundation, the help they were providing, the future they were building, all of it could come crashing down if Derek Paulson decided to make trouble. "What do we do?" Maria asked. Earl thought about his father's letter, about the promise made to William Garrett more than a century ago. Help people, do good, keep the secret. It had seemed so simple when he first read those words. Now he was learning that doing good was never simple, not when people like Derek Paulson stood in the way. "We be careful," Earl said finally. "We keep doing what we're doing, but we watch our backs. And we make damn sure every dollar we spend, every grant we make, is documented properly. If he comes digging, he'll find a legitimate foundation doing legitimate work. And if that's not enough..." Tom asked. Earl turned from the window, his jaw set. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not selling, and I'm not stopping the foundation's work. My father spent his whole life afraid of losing this secret. I'm not going to let fear stop me from using it the way it was meant to be used." Maria nodded approvingly. "Your father would be proud." "Maybe," Earl said. "But I'm not doing this to make him proud. I'm doing it because it's right." Derek Paulson's visit cast a shadow over the next few weeks. Earl found himself second-guessing every decision, wondering if each grant they approved might somehow draw unwanted attention. Maria reassured him that everything was legally sound, but legal didn't always mean safe from scrutiny. Christmas came to the ranch. Earl put up a small tree in the living room, more out of habit than holiday spirit. He invited Tom and Maria for dinner, and they sat around his grandfather's oak table, sharing a meal and stories about Christmases past. Tom talked about Jenny, his daughter who died so young, and how Earl's father had made her last Christmas special with an anonymous gift of toys and games. Maria spoke of families the foundation had helped. Children who'd have presents under their trees because of scholarships that freed up family budgets. "We've helped 17 families so far," Maria said, reviewing her notes over coffee. "Distributed almost $200,000 in 4 months. At this rate, we'll need to sell more of the collection soon." "I'm working on it," Earl said. "Got a contact in Seattle who handles estate jewelry. Planning a trip after the new year." "Be careful," Tom cautioned. "Derek Paulson has connections everywhere. Last thing we need is him finding out about those sales. Different name, different story each time," Earl assured him. "Far as anyone knows, I'm just a guy liquidating his grandfather's estate piece by piece." After they left, Earl sat alone with the remains of dinner, thinking about the strange path his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been in Phoenix, drifting through construction jobs, living in a studio apartment, going through the motions of a life without purpose. Now he was running a ranch, managing a secret fortune, helping people he'd never met. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt right, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The new year brought snow and complications. In January, a county assessor showed up unannounced, claiming he needed to revalue the property. Earl let him look around, watched him take notes and photographs, and tried not to think about who might have requested the assessment. "You've done a lot of work here," the assessor said, examining the repaired fences and freshly painted barn. "Property's in better shape than our records indicated." "Just taking care of what's mine," Earl replied evenly. "Still, the improvements will affect your tax assessment. You're looking at a significant increase." After the assessor left, Earl called Maria. "Let me guess," she said when he explained. "Derek Paulson is on the County Planning Commission, is he?" "Appointed last year. He's got friends in local government. If he wants to make your life difficult through property taxes, he can." Earl did the math that night. Even with the improvements, the increase seemed excessive, designed more to pressure him into selling than to reflect actual value. It was the kind of small, legal harassment that wore people down over time. But Earl had resources his father never did. When the tax bill arrived, he paid it without complaint. The money came from his personal account, funded by the legitimate sale of gold coins. Let Derek wonder how a struggling rancher could afford it. February brought a different kind of challenge. Maria called with news that the Rodriguez boy, their first scholarship recipient, was struggling at university. Not academically, he was doing fine there, but emotionally. He felt guilty, she explained, taking money when so many others needed it. Earl drove to Bozeman to meet with him. Carlos Rodriguez was 19, earnest and thoughtful, sitting across from Earl in a coffee shop near campus. "I appreciate what the foundation did for me," Carlos said. "But I keep thinking about my cousins, my friends back home. They need help too. Why me? Why did I get chosen?" Earl thought about how to answer. He couldn't tell the truth, that a century-old fortune sat in a barn, waiting to help everyone who needed it. Instead, he spoke from his heart. "My wife died 4 years ago," Earl said. "Cancer. Toward the end, she told me something I've been thinking about a lot lately. She said that accepting help wasn't taking anything away from anyone else. It was just letting good things happen. When you refuse help, you're not saving it for someone else. You're just stopping good from happening." Carlos was quiet for a moment. "But there's only so much to go around, is there? I mean, sure, the foundation has limits, but maybe—" Earl paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe the point isn't to help everyone at once. Maybe it's to help one person who then helps another who helps another. You know what you're going to do when you graduate? Teach high school math. And how many kids will you teach in your career? Hundreds, thousands? Maybe one of them becomes the next great mathematician or engineer or teacher. You see what I'm saying? The foundation helped you, but you're going to help a lot more people than we ever could. That's how this works. That's how good spreads. When Earl left, Carlos seemed lighter somehow. The guilt hadn't disappeared entirely. Earl suspected it never would. But it had been reframed into something more like responsibility. Not a burden, but a purpose. Driving back to the ranch, Earl thought about his own guilt. The years he'd stayed away from his father. The conversations they'd never had. The forgiveness they'd never explicitly given each other. His father's letter had been an attempt at reconciliation, but Earl still carried the weight of those lost years. Maybe Carlos had taught him something too. Maybe instead of drowning in what couldn't be changed, Earl needed to focus on what could. His father was gone, but the legacy remained. Every family they helped, every life they touched, it was a form of ongoing conversation with a man who'd tried to do good but hadn't known how to share that with his son. March brought the first real crisis. A family the foundation had helped, the Mortons, whose farm had been saved from foreclosure, was approached by Derek Paulson with an offer to buy their property. The offer was generous, but it came with a catch. Derek wanted information about the foundation's finances. Where did the money come from? Who really ran it? What was Earl McKenna's involvement? The Mortons refused and called Maria immediately. He's trying to use the people we've helped against us, Maria told Earl. He thinks they'll sell us out for the right price. Will they? The Mortons won't. But Earl, we've helped 17 families. If he approaches all of them, offers them enough money, some will talk, Earl finished. Not out of malice, just because they need the money more than they need to protect a foundation they barely know. They called an emergency meeting at the ranch. Tom, Maria, and Earl sat around the kitchen table, the same table where 3 generations of McKennas had made decisions about the secret treasure. We can't blame people for taking care of their families, Tom said. If Derek offers real money, some folks will take it. So what do we do? Earl asked. Maria tapped her pen against her notebook. We get ahead of it. We reach out to every family we've helped, explain that there's someone trying to undermine the foundation. We don't ask them to lie for us. We just ask them to be careful about who they talk to. And if that's not enough, then we prepare for the possibility that Derek will learn more than we want him to know. Which means we need to make absolutely certain that everything about the foundation is above board. No loose threads, no questionable documentation, nothing that could give him leverage. Earl thought about the wagon sitting in the barn, still half full of coins and jewelry. They'd been careful, sold things slowly through legitimate channels, but there were limits to how much scrutiny the whole operation could withstand. If Derek really pushed, if he got the IRS involved or hired investigators, there's another option, Tom said quietly. You could sell him the ranch. Take the money, shut down the foundation, walk away clean. The suggestion hung in the air. It would solve everything, the tax pressure, the scrutiny, the constant worry about discovery. Earl could take Derek's money, probably negotiate for more now that Derek was desperate, and disappear. Start over somewhere else. It's what his father would have done, Earl realized. Avoid the conflict, protect the secret at all costs. But Earl wasn't his father. No, he said firmly. We don't run. We don't hide. We keep doing what we're doing, and if Derek Paulson wants a fight, we'll give him one. But we do it smart, and we do it legal, and we don't let fear make us into the kind of people who walk away when things get hard. Maria smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. You've got a plan, Earl guessed. The beginning of one. But it's going to require something you might not be ready for. What's that? We need to go public. Not about the gold, but about you. Right now, the foundation is this mysterious entity that appeared out of nowhere. That makes people suspicious. But if we tell a story, your story, about inheriting your father's estate, about wanting to honor his memory by helping others, that's something people can understand and support. Earl felt his stomach tighten. He'd spent months avoiding attention, staying in the background, letting Maria be the face of the foundation. The idea of stepping forward, of making himself visible. But wasn't that exactly what he'd decided to do differently than his father? To let people in, to share the burden, to stop living in fear of discovery? All right, he said. What do you need me to do? The newspaper interview appeared 2 weeks later. Earl had sat with the reporter for 3 hours, telling a carefully edited version of the truth. His father had left him the ranch and a modest inheritance. Earl, wanting to honor his father's memory and the community that had supported the McKenna family for generations, had established a foundation. It wasn't a complete lie, just strategic omissions. The article painted Earl as a grieving son trying to do right by his father's legacy. Readers responded warmly. Donations started coming in. Small amounts, $20 here, $50 there, but they added up. More importantly, they gave the foundation additional legitimacy. It wasn't just Earl's money anymore. It was community-supported. Derek Paulson called 3 days after the article ran. Earl let it go to voicemail. The message was brief and cold. Touching story, McKenna. But stories don't pay property taxes, and they don't stop progress. Think about my offer. It won't be on the table forever. That night, Earl couldn't sleep. He went out to the barn around midnight, standing in the doorway and looking at the wagon that had changed his life. They'd sold maybe a quarter of what was there, enough to fund the foundation for a few years, enough to help dozens of families. But the bulk of it remained, silent and patient, waiting. He was about to head back to the house when he heard it, the distinct sound of a vehicle on the gravel road. Earl's ranch was a mile from the main highway, down a private drive. Nobody came out here by accident, especially not at midnight. He moved quickly to the barn door, pulling it closed, but leaving a gap to see through. A truck rolled up slowly, headlights off, parking near the house. 2 men got out, their faces obscured by the darkness. They wore dark clothing and moved with purpose toward the house. Earl's heart hammered. Break in. He watched them try the front door, then move around to the back. One of them was doing something to the back door, lock-picking, Earl realized. They were getting in. He pulled out his phone, ready to call the sheriff, then hesitated. If police came, they'd ask questions. They'd want to know if anything was taken, want an inventory of valuable items. The last thing Earl needed was law enforcement poking around the property. Instead, he moved quietly toward the house, staying in shadows. The men were inside now. He could see flashlight beams through the windows. They were searching for something, opening drawers, checking closets. Looking for what? Money, valuables, information. The realization hit Earl like cold water. Derek Paulson had sent them. He was looking for proof of where the foundation's money came from. Looking for something he could use as leverage. Earl watched them work their way through the house, frustration evident in their increasingly rough handling of his father's belongings. They weren't going to find anything incriminating in the house. All the foundation paperwork was at Maria's office, and the ledger was in the glove box of Earl's truck, where he'd taken to keeping it for safety. Then one of the men spoke, voice carrying through the quiet night. Nothing here? Check the barn. Earl's blood ran cold. The barn, the wagon, the remaining gold. He moved fast, racing back to the barn ahead of them. His mind worked frantically. If they found the wagon, found the gold, everything was over. The foundation, the secret, everything his grandfather and father had worked to protect. The barn door had a heavy beam that could be dropped across it from inside, an old security measure from decades past. Earl slipped inside, closed the door as quietly as he could, and dropped the beam into place. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might buy time. He heard the men approach, heard one of them try the door. It's locked from inside, the man said. Someone's in there. Then we get them out, the other replied. Check if there's another entrance. Earl moved through the barn in darkness, his hands finding the wagon by memory. He couldn't hide it, too big, too heavy. But maybe he could hide what mattered most. He grabbed the nearest sack of coins, hoisting it over his shoulder, then another. The journals and letters, those were crucial. He stuffed them inside his jacket. Outside, he heard the men circling the barn, looking for a way in. They'd find one. There was a small side door he'd forgotten about, probably rusty, but definitely there. Then Earl had an idea. A crazy, desperate idea. But it might work. He moved to the far corner of the barn, where he'd noticed old hay bales stacked almost to the rafters. Climbing up with the sacks of gold, he shoved them deep into the stack, covering them with loose hay. The journals went into his jacket. Not a perfect hiding place, but in darkness, with only flashlights, they might not find it. He heard the side door give way with a shriek of metal. The men were in. Earl climbed down from the hay bales and moved toward the main wagon. When the flashlight beams found him, he was standing casually beside it, arms crossed, like a man who'd been waiting for them. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, voice steady despite his racing heart. Both men froze. They'd been expecting to find the barn empty, or maybe to catch someone unaware. They hadn't expected Earl to be standing there, calm and alert. "You're trespassing," Earl continued, "and breaking and entering. Sheriff's on his way." He hadn't called, but they didn't know that. The men exchanged glances. One of them, the taller one, stepped forward. "We're just looking around. Heard there might be some valuable antiques in this barn." "Heard from who?" Earl asked, though he knew the answer. "Someone interested in local history," the man said, his tone making it clear he had no intention of giving up his employer's name. His flashlight swept across the wagon, lingering on the remaining crates. "That's quite a collection you've got there." "Family heirlooms," Earl said. "Not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. Not to thieves who break into people's homes at midnight." The standoff stretched. Earl could see the men calculating, trying to decide if whatever they might find was worth the risk of assault charges. Finally, the shorter one spoke. "Let's go. This was a bust anyway." They backed toward the side door, flashlights still on Earl. "You should think about selling this place," the tall one said. "Bad things happen to stubborn people out here. Long way from town, nobody around to hear if something goes wrong." The threat was clear. Earl held his ground until they were gone, until he heard their truck start up and drive away. Only then did he allow himself to shake. He went immediately to the house, checking the damage. They'd been thorough but not destructive, professional, looking for specific things. Financial records, probably. Bank statements. Anything that would prove the foundation's money came from an illegitimate source. Earl called Tom first, then Maria. They arrived within the hour, finding Earl sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees. The journals from the barn stacked beside him. "You should have called the sheriff," Tom said, after Earl explained what happened. "And tell them what?" "That I caught thieves breaking in. But I can't report what they were looking for because I'm hiding a fortune in treasure." Earl shook his head. "We're in deeper than I realized. Derek isn't just applying pressure anymore. He's actively trying to find something to use against us." Maria picked up one of the journals, handling it carefully. "Have you read these?" "Not yet. Haven't had time. Maybe you should. If Derek is digging into your family's past, you should know what he might find." After they left, Earl took the journals inside. His father had mentioned them in the letter. Journals that documented the treasure's history, how it had been used over the years. Earl opened the oldest one, dated 1923, written in his grandfather's hand. He read through the night, watching the story unfold. His grandfather finding the treasure, making the promise to William Garrett, using the money to help people during the Depression. But there was more. Details his father's letter hadn't mentioned. Garrett hadn't just been running guns to the Lakota. He'd been married to a Lakota woman, had children with her. The treasure was meant for them, for their future. But after Garrett was arrested, his wife and children had been forced onto a reservation and died there in poverty, while the money that should have supported them sat hidden in a ravine. Earl's grandfather had tried to find Garrett's descendants, had spent years searching. But by the time he located them in the 1940s, most were dead or scattered. The few he found refused the money. Accepting it would mean acknowledging their connection to a man who'd been branded a traitor, and they wanted nothing to do with that legacy. So the money stayed hidden, used instead to help others, because that's what Garrett had wanted in the end. Help people, do good with it. Make it mean something besides grief and betrayal. But there was one more entry that made Earl's blood run cold. It was dated 1951, written by his grandfather just months before he died. "Today, I learned that William Garrett had one more descendant I didn't know about. A great-granddaughter. I tried to contact her, to offer her portion, but she refused to respond to my letters. She married, took a different name, wanted nothing to do with her family's past. I have to respect that. But I've noted her name here, in case future generations want to make things right. Margaret Garrett Paulson. Paulson. Read the name 3 times, not believing it. Then he grabbed his laptop and started searching. Margaret Garrett Paulson had died in 1998. She'd had one son, Derek Paulson. Derek Paulson was William Garrett's great-great-grandson. The man trying to destroy Earl, trying to steal his land, trying to expose the foundation. He was family. He was the rightful heir to the treasure Earl had been using to help people, and he had absolutely no idea. Earl didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of him, staring at Margaret Garrett Paulson's name, trying to figure out what it meant, what he should do about it. The moral arithmetic was complicated. Derek had a legitimate claim to the treasure. More legitimate than Earl's, certainly. It had belonged to his great-great-grandfather. But Derek didn't know that. He was hunting for the source of the foundation's wealth, not because he suspected a family connection, but because he wanted to eliminate competition for the valley's land. If Earl told him the truth, gave him the treasure, would Derek use it the way Garrett had intended? The man who'd sent thieves to break into Earl's home, who tried to bribe families the foundation had helped, who wanted to bulldoze family ranches to build luxury resorts. Earl thought not, but keeping the treasure, knowing Derek had a rightful claim to it, that was theft, wasn't it? No different from what Derek was trying to do to the valley ranches. By morning, Earl had made a decision. He called Maria and Tom, asked them to come to the ranch. When they arrived, he showed them the journal entry. "Sweet Mary," Maria whispered. "Derek Paulson is Garrett's descendant?" "Looks that way. His great-great-grandson." "Then the treasure is his," Tom said flatly. "By rights, it should go to him." "I know," Earl said. "But here's the question, do we tell him? Because once we do, it all ends. The foundation, the help we're providing, everything. Derek will take the money and use it to line his own pockets. Every family we could have helped will go without. So we're back to the same question your grandfather faced," Maria said slowly. "The rightful heir doesn't want to use the money the way it was meant to be used. Do you honor the bloodline or honor the intent?" They sat with that for a long moment. Finally, Tom spoke. "Your granddaddy tried to give it to the family. They refused. He documented that right there in the journal. So at some point, the moral obligation to the bloodline was satisfied. After that, it became about honoring Garrett's wishes, help people, do good. But Derek never got that chance to refuse," Earl countered. His grandmother turned down the offer, but he never knew there was something to refuse. "That's different, is it?" Maria challenged. "Look at what he's doing, trying to force families off their land, consolidating power, building his resort for rich people. If he'd somehow learned about the treasure years ago, do you honestly think he'd have used it to help others?" Earl wanted to say no immediately, but honesty stopped him. "I don't know. People can surprise you. My father seemed like a hard, bitter man, but he spent 40 years helping people in secret. Maybe Derek sent men to rob you," Tom interrupted. "Last night. They came to your home, went through your things, threatened you. That's who he is. That's the choice he's already made about what he values. But what if I'm wrong?" Earl pressed. "And what if I keep this from him and I'm just stealing from a man because I don't like what he'd do with his own inheritance?" Maria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. "Let me ask you something, Earl. What did your father's letter say? What did he tell you to do?" "Help people. Don't let the money change who I am." "And have you done that?" "I've tried. More than tried. You've helped 17 families in 6 months. You've funded scholarships, paid medical bills, kept people in their homes. You've done exactly what Garrett wanted, what your grandfather and father tried to do." She turned back to face him. "Now Derek is trying to destroy that work, not because he has any claim to it. He doesn't even know there's a claim to make, but because it interferes with his business interests. Are you really suggesting we should hand him a fortune so he can use it to hurt the very people Garrett wanted to help?" Put that way, it sounded simple. But Earl knew it wasn't. There were principles at stake, questions about rightful ownership and moral obligation that didn't have easy answers. "There might be another way," Tom said slowly. We could tell him the truth about his ancestor, about what Garrett wanted the money used for. Give him a chance to do the right thing. If he refuses, if he tries to take it all for himself, then at least we'll know we tried. And if he takes us to court, Maria asked, claims ownership of the treasure? We'd lose, and the foundation would be destroyed in the process. So would the secret, Earl added. The moment this goes to court, everyone will know where the money came from. Government will probably step in, claim it as historical property or something. Nobody wins except lawyers. They argued in circles for another hour, each of them seeing valid points on all sides. Finally, Earl held up his hand. I need time to think. This isn't a decision we should rush. Derek doesn't know about his connection to Garrett, and he doesn't know about the treasure, not specifically. We've got some time to figure out the right thing to do, but time, it turned out, was the one thing they didn't have. 3 days later, Earl received a registered letter from Derek Paulson's attorney. It was 10 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple threat: sell the ranch within 30 days, or face a lawsuit alleging that the McKenna Family Foundation was engaged in money laundering and fraud. They don't have evidence for this, Maria said, reading through the letter. It's pure intimidation. They're hoping you'll panic and settle. Will they file anyway if I don't sell? Maybe, probably. Derek's shown he's willing to use the legal system as a weapon. Even if he loses, the process will be expensive and time-consuming. And it'll put the foundation under intense scrutiny. Earl thought about everything they'd built in the last 6 months. The families they'd helped, the lives they'd touched. Carlos Rodriguez studying to become a teacher. The Morton family still farming their land. 17 families, and they'd only just begun. Then I guess we need to prepare for a fight, Earl said. There's something else, Tom said quietly. He pulled out a folder he'd been carrying. Did some research of my own. Turns out Derek's development plans aren't as solid as he claims. He's leveraged to the hilt, borrowed millions based on the assumption he could acquire the whole valley. Without your ranch, without the water rights, his project won't work. Banks are already getting nervous. Earl looked through the documents. Tom was right. Derek was overextended, financially precarious. If he couldn't get Earl's ranch, his entire empire might collapse. So he's desperate, Maria said. That makes him more dangerous, not less. Or it gives us leverage, Earl countered. He needs this ranch more than I need to sell it. If we can hold out, wait him out, he goes bankrupt, loses everything, Tom finished. And probably takes his anger out on you in the process. Men like Derek don't lose gracefully. They spent the rest of the day planning. Maria would respond to the legal threat with a carefully worded letter defending the foundation's legitimacy. Tom would reach out to other ranchers in the valley, gauge interest in banding together against Derek's development plans. Earl would continue selling pieces of the treasure, building the foundation's reserves. But that night, alone in the house, Earl pulled out his grandfather's journal again. He read the entries about William Garrett, about the choices made a century ago, about the promise that had shaped 3 generations of McKennas. There was an entry near the end that Earl had missed before, written just weeks before his grandfather died. Sometimes doing right means making hard choices nobody else would understand. The treasure sits in the barn, and I know there are people who have a better claim to it than I do. But I also know that if I give it to them, it won't be used the way Will Garrett wanted. So I carry this burden and hope that someday someone will understand why. Earl understood now. His grandfather had wrestled with the same moral questions, had made the choice to prioritize intent over inheritance. His father had done the same. And now it was Earl's turn to carry that burden, to make that choice. But there was a difference this time. Earl had allies, Tom and Maria, people who shared the weight. He had a foundation that was already doing good, already proving that the treasure could be used the way Garrett had intended. And he had something his father and grandfather never had, a chance to confront Derek directly, to give him the choice they'd never been able to offer. Earl made his decision. He would meet with Derek. He would tell him about the treasure, about his ancestor, about the legacy he was unknowingly trying to destroy. He would offer Derek a chance to be part of something meaningful, to honor his great-great-grandfather's wishes. And if Derek refused, if he chose greed over legacy, money over meaning, then Earl would fight him with everything he had. Not to steal what rightfully belonged to Derek, but to protect what rightfully belonged to the people Garrett had wanted to help. It was a gamble. Derek might sue, might try to seize the treasure, might destroy everything Earl had built. But it was also the right thing to do. Sarah had taught him that sometimes you had to risk everything on doing what was right, even when you knew you might lose. Earl picked up his phone and dialed Derek's number. After 3 rings, a smooth voice answered. "Paulson, Derek, it's Earl McKenna. I think it's time we talked. Face to face, just the 2 of us. There's something you need to know about your family history." There was a pause. "I'm listening," not over the phone. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, my ranch. Come alone." This conversation changes everything. Another pause, longer this time. Earl could almost hear Derek calculating, trying to figure out the angle. "All right," Derek said finally. "I'll be there." "But McKenna, if this is some kind of trick—" "It's not a trick," Earl interrupted. "It's the truth. A truth that's been hidden for 100 years. You deserve to know it." He hung up before Derek could respond. Tom and Maria arrived an hour later, summoned by Earl's text. He told them what he'd done, what he planned to say. Maria looked worried. Tom looked resigned, but neither tried to talk him out of it. "You sure about this?" Tom asked. "No," Earl admitted. "But I'm sure I can't keep lying to him. He's Garrett's heir. He deserves the choice, even if he makes the wrong one. And if he chooses wrong, if he takes everything—" Earl looked out at the barn, dark against the evening sky. "Then at least I'll have done the right thing. At least I won't have stolen from him, even if he would have stolen from everyone else." They spent the evening planning what Earl would say, how he'd present the information, what documents he'd show. But ultimately, they all knew it would come down to a single moment, the moment Derek learned about his ancestors' treasure and decided what kind of man he wanted to be. Earl barely slept. He was up before dawn, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. He thought about Garrett, about a man who'd tried to help people and paid for it with his life. About his grandfather, who'd found a treasure and turned it into kindness. About his father, who'd lived alone so others could live better. And he thought about Sarah, who taught him that the measure of a man wasn't what he accumulated, but what he gave away. At 9:30, Earl walked out to the barn one last time. He opened the doors wide, letting sunlight flood the interior. The wagon sat there, still holding its secrets, still waiting to see what would come next. At 10 o'clock exactly, Derek Paulson's truck rolled up the drive. It was time. Derek stepped out of his truck looking wary. He'd dressed down for the occasion. Jeans and a work shirt instead of his usual expensive casual wear, but he still moved like a man who expected the world to accommodate him. His eyes swept the property, cataloguing, assessing, looking for traps. "McKenna," he said by way of greeting. "This better be worth my time." "It will be." Earl gestured toward the barn. "Let's talk inside." Derek hesitated at the barn entrance, his instincts telling him something significant was happening. When he stepped through the doors and saw the wagon, he stopped dead. "What is this?" "Your family history," Earl said. "Specifically, your great-great-grandfather, William Garrett." Derek's face showed genuine surprise. "How do you know about Garrett?" "So you know the name." "My mother mentioned him once or twice. Said he was some kind of criminal, ran guns or something. She didn't like to talk about it." "Family embarrassment." Derek moved closer to the wagon, examining it with a developer's eye. "This can't be the original." "It is. Garrett hid it in 1885. My grandfather found it in 1923. It's been in this barn ever since." Derek walked around the wagon slowly. "Found what exactly?" "Everything you see here, plus what I've already sold to fund the McKenna Family Foundation." That stopped Derek cold. He turned to face Earl, calculation replacing surprise in his expression. "The foundation money came from this?" "From what was in this wagon, yes. Gold coins, jewelry, cash. Your great-great-grandfather's fortune, hidden before he was arrested." Earl paused. "By rights it belongs to you. You're his only living descendant." The silence stretched between them. Earl could see Derek's mind working, adding up the implications, the possibilities. Finally, Derek spoke. How much are we talking about? Originally? Maybe 5 million. I've sold about a quarter of it. What's left? Maybe 3 million, depending on collector value. Derek's face went carefully neutral, but Earl saw the flash of greed in his eyes. $3 million. Enough to save his development project. Enough to buy the valley. Enough to make all his problems disappear. And you're just telling me this because you deserve to know. Your grandmother was offered a portion years ago. My grandfather tried to find Garrett's descendants, tried to give them the treasure. They refused it, wanted nothing to do with that legacy. But you never got that choice. You should have it now. Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me get this straight. You're telling me that I'm the rightful owner of a $3 million treasure that you've been using to fund your charity foundation. And you expect me to just, what? Walk away, let you keep it. I expect you to make a choice, Earl said evenly. The same choice Garrett made. He wanted this money used to help people. That's what I've been doing. That's what the foundation does. You can honor that legacy, or you can take the money for yourself. But you should know what you're choosing. Help people, Derek repeated mockingly. Is that what you call it? Using stolen money to play Santa Claus? Not stolen, entrusted. There's a difference. Not in the eyes of the law. Derek pulled out his phone. You just admitted to me that you've been selling property that rightfully belongs to me. That's theft. I could call my lawyer right now, have you arrested. You could, Earl agreed. And then you'd own a fortune that came from a man who tried to help the Lakota people, who wanted to do something good with his wealth. You'd use it to build resorts, to force families off their land, to make yourself richer. Is that really the legacy you want? Derek's face hardened. Don't try to guilt me with some noble ancestor story. Garrett was a criminal. He ran guns to Indians who were fighting American settlers. He got what he deserved. He was married to a Lakota woman, had children with her. He was trying to protect his family. And where are they now? Dead, I'm guessing. His noble cause didn't save them, did it? Derek gestured around the barn. This money has been sitting here for 100 years, doing nothing. My grandmother refused it because she was ashamed of where it came from. Well, I'm not ashamed. I'm practical. And practically speaking, this treasure is mine. Earl had hoped for a different response, had hoped that knowing the truth might change something in Derek. But he'd known it was a long shot. Men like Derek didn't change. They just got more elaborate in justifying what they wanted to do anyway. So that's your choice, Earl said quietly. Take the money, shut down the foundation, make sure no one else benefits from what your ancestor wanted to share. That's my choice, Derek confirmed. I'll give you 1 hour to gather all documentation about what you've sold, where the money went, everything. Then my lawyers take over. You can cooperate, or I can make this very difficult for you. Your choice now. Derek turned to leave, then paused at the barn door. You know, McKenna, I almost admire what you tried to do here. Playing the noble hero, helping the poor ranchers. But this is the real world. Noble doesn't pay the bills. Noble doesn't save failing ranchers or aging cowboys who can't compete anymore. Money does. Power does. And now both are mine. He walked out, leaving Earl standing alone in the barn with the wagon and the weight of his failed gamble. Earl watched Derek's truck disappear down the drive, then pulled out his phone. Tom and Maria were there within 20 minutes, finding Earl still in the barn, sitting on the edge of the wagon. He chose the money, Earl said without preamble. Maria sank onto a hay bale. I was afraid of that. Now what? Tom asked. Now we face the consequences. Derek knows everything. He'll file a claim to the treasure, probably sue the foundation, definitely come after me personally. Best case, we spend years in court. Worst case, I end up in jail for theft. You didn't steal anything, Maria protested. Your grandfather found it. Your father inherited it. You inherited it from him. There's a legal chain of ownership, is there? Earl challenged. Or is there just 100 years of people keeping secrets from the rightful heir? Derek's lawyers will argue we knew about the family connection. My grandfather documented it right there in his journal. We knew and we kept it anyway. They sat in heavy silence. Finally, Tom spoke. What if we give him the ranch? Earl looked at him sharply. What? The ranch? Sign it over to him, free and clear. Tell him he can have the property, the treasure, everything. Just ask him to let the foundation continue its work with the money that's already been distributed. He won't go for that, Maria said. He wants it all, the property, the treasure, and the destruction of anything that got in his way. It's not about money anymore. It's about winning. She was right. Earl had seen it in Derek's eyes. This had become personal, a battle of wills. Derek wouldn't settle for partial victory. Then we go public, Earl said, the idea forming as he spoke. We tell the whole story. Garrett, the treasure, how it's been used for 100 years to help people. We let the court of public opinion decide who has the moral right to this money. That's risky, Maria warned. You'd be admitting to everything Derek's going to accuse you of. But we'd also be showing what the alternative is. Derek Paulson, using his ancestors' fortune to bulldoze family ranches and build luxury resorts. Versus the McKenna Family Foundation, helping families stay in their homes, funding education, paying medical bills. Let people decide which honors Garrett's wishes. Tom nodded slowly. Public pressure might force him to compromise, or at least make it politically difficult for him to push his development plans. It might also get Earl arrested, Maria pointed out. Probably will, Earl agreed. But Tom's right about the pressure. This valley, these people, they've been helped by the foundation. They know what it's done. If Derek tries to destroy that, tries to take everything for himself, they won't stand for it. You're gambling that community loyalty beats legal ownership, Maria said. I'm gambling that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. Earl stood, decision made. My father spent his whole life hiding, keeping secrets, helping people from the shadows. It protected the treasure, but it also meant nobody knew what he'd sacrificed. I won't make that mistake. If we're going down with the truth told. Then we'd better tell it right, Tom said. And we'd better do it fast, before Derek controls the narrative. They spent the next hour calling everyone they knew, the reporter who'd written the foundation story. Families the foundation had helped, other ranchers in the valley. Maria drafted a statement explaining everything. The discovery of the treasure, Garrett's wishes, Derek's family connection, and his choice to claim it for personal gain rather than honor the legacy. By evening, the story was out. Social media exploded with it. People took sides, some defending Derek's legal right to family property, others outraged that he'd destroy a charitable foundation to enrich himself. Local news picked it up, then regional, then national. The treasure in the Montana barn became a story about wealth, legacy, and what we owe to the past. Derek called at 8 p.m., his voice tight with fury. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, McKenna. Maybe, but at least everyone knows the truth now. The truth is that you stole from me. That's what the court will decide. That's what history will remember. Maybe, or maybe history will remember that you had a choice to honor your ancestors' wishes or to spit on them. And you chose wrong. Derek hung up without responding. The next morning, Earl woke to find reporters camped at the end of his drive. Tom and Maria arrived to help him handle the media circus. By noon, Derek had issued his own statement through his lawyers. The treasure was rightfully his. The foundation was built on theft, and he would pursue all legal remedies. But something unexpected happened. The families the foundation had helped started speaking up. They told their stories. Medical bills paid, farms saved, educations funded. They showed what the money had done, what it had meant to people barely hanging on. They painted a picture of generosity and community that contrasted sharply with Derek's million-dollar development plans. Public opinion shifted. Derek might have the law on his side, but Earl had something stronger. People who'd been helped, lives that had been changed. Proof that Garrett's wishes had been honored. 3 days later, Tom got a phone call from one of his banking contacts. Derek's primary lender was pulling out of the resort project. Too much negative publicity, too much community opposition. Without that financing, Derek's entire empire was collapsing. Earl was in the barn when Tom brought him the news. He stood by the wagon, running his hand along its weathered wood. thinking about choices and consequences. "He's going to fight harder now," Earl said. "Desperate men do desperate things. Let him fight," Tom replied. "We've got truth on our side. And this community, that's got to count for something." Earl hoped Tom was right. But he also knew that sometimes, even when you did everything right, you still lost. The legal battle dragged on for 6 months. Derek filed his claim to the treasure. Earl countered with documentation of his family's stewardship, and lawyers on both sides generated paperwork that could have filled the barn. The foundation's work ground to a halt. No new grants could be approved until ownership was established. But something unexpected happened during that time. The story of the treasure, of Garrett's wishes and Earl's choice to reveal the truth, resonated beyond the valley. Donations poured into the foundation from across the country, small amounts from people who wanted to support what they saw as a fight for community over corporate greed. It didn't replace the treasure, but it kept the foundation alive, kept help flowing to families who needed it. Derek's resort project died completely. His other lenders pulled out one by one, unwilling to be associated with a man trying to destroy a charitable foundation for personal gain. He lost properties, contracts, everything he'd built. By spring, he was filing for bankruptcy. The judge's ruling came on a Tuesday morning in early May. Earl sat in the courtroom flanked by Tom and Maria, watching Derek across the aisle. 6 months of legal combat had aged them all. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, read her decision carefully. The treasure, she ruled, did legally belong to Derek Paulson as William Garrett's direct descendant. But, and this was crucial, the money Earl had already distributed through the foundation had been given in good faith to charitable causes. That money couldn't be clawed back. Derek could claim what remained in the barn, but the families who'd been helped got to keep their help. It was a split decision, satisfying no one completely. Derek got the remaining treasure, maybe $2 million worth. Earl kept the foundation alive, but lost the source of its future funding. The judge noted that both parties had acted according to their principles, however much those principles differed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Derek left through a side entrance without commenting. Earl stood on the steps with Tom and Maria and told the truth. They'd lost the treasure but not the mission. "The foundation will continue," he said. "We'll do it the hard way, with donations and fundraisers and community support. But we'll do it. That's what matters." Back at the ranch that evening, Earl walked out to the barn one final time before Derek's people came to claim the wagon. He'd known this moment was coming, had tried to prepare himself for it, but it still hurt. 3 generations of McKennas had protected this secret, had used it to help others. Now it was over. He found an envelope tucked into one of the crates, hidden so well he'd missed it before. Inside was a letter in faded ink, dated 1884, written in William Garrett's own hand. Earl read it by the light filtering through the barn walls. "To whoever finds this," Garrett had written, "I hope you're a better man than I was. I made my fortune honestly, but spent it fighting a war I couldn't win, trying to protect people who didn't want my kind of protection. My wife is dead, my children scattered, and I'll die in prison for crimes that were really just love in the wrong language. If you've found this money, use it. Help people if you can, but more importantly, don't make my mistakes. Don't wait until it's too late to do good. Don't hide your kindness or your love. The worst prison isn't made of bars. It's made of all the things you didn't do when you had the chance." Earl folded the letter carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. It wasn't treasure, not in the way Derek would understand, but it was the most valuable thing he'd found in the barn. Derek's people arrived the next day with trucks and armed guards. They inventoried everything, loaded it up, drove it away. The barn stood empty for the first time in 100 years. Earl watched from the porch, feeling the weight of history settling and then lifting. It was over. A week later, something remarkable happened. Carlos Rodriguez, the first scholarship recipient, started a fundraiser for the foundation. His story went viral, student helped by mysterious foundation works to save it. Money came in from everywhere. Other families the foundation had helped joined in, hosting events, sharing their stories, contributing what they could. The foundation would survive, Earl realized. Not because of hidden treasure, but because the community had decided it mattered. That was better, more sustainable, more honest than what his father and grandfather had done. They'd helped people in secret. Earl would help people in the open. Derek Paulson left Montana 3 months later. The last Earl heard, he was working for a development company in Nevada, no longer calling the shots but taking orders. The bankruptcy had taken everything, his properties, his reputation, his dreams of building an empire. He'd gotten the treasure he wanted and lost everything that mattered. The valley began to heal. Ranches that had been threatened found new life. Young families moved in, attracted by a community that supported its own. The foundation helped when it could, with the resources it had, never as dramatically as before, but consistently. Sustainably, Earl worked the ranch and managed the foundation and lived a life that would have been unrecognizable to his father. Open, connected, surrounded by people who knew his story and respected what he'd tried to do. Tom and Maria became more than partners. They became family, the kind of family Earl had never really had growing up. On the first anniversary of finding the barn's secret, Earl drove out to the cemetery where his father and grandfather were buried. He stood by their graves in the late afternoon light and told them about the year, the discovery, the choices made, the battle fought, the community built. "I don't know if I did the right thing," he said to the gravestones. Telling Derek, "Losing the treasure, maybe you'd have found a way to keep it all secret. But I couldn't. I couldn't keep living in hiding, couldn't keep that burden alone. So I chose different. I hope you understand." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the smell of distant rain. Earl stood there for a long time, feeling something like forgiveness settling over him. For the years he'd stayed away, for the conversations they'd never had, were being different than they'd been. He thought about Garrett's letter, about not waiting until it's too late. Earl had spent 4 years with Sarah after her diagnosis. 4 years of saying "I love you," of making memories, of not hiding from hard truths. Those years had hurt, but he wouldn't trade them for anything. The barn's secret was gone. But Earl had learned something more valuable than treasure, that doing good in the open, with help and community and honest connection, was worth more than all the hidden gold in the world. His father and grandfather had done the best they could with what they knew. Earl was doing the same, and maybe that's all any generation could ask of the next. Not that they do things the same way, but that they try, with whatever wisdom they've gained, to do them better. As Earl walked back to his truck, he thought about the families the foundation would help this year. The scholarships they'd fund, the medical bills they'd pay. Not with secret treasure, but with community support. Not hiding in shadows, but standing in the light. It was enough. More than enough. It was exactly what he'd been looking for when he came back to the ranch all those months ago. A way to make his life matter. A reason to get up in the morning, a home worth building. The barn stood empty behind him, but Earl McKenna had everything he needed.